If you are over 60 and your waistline refuses to shrink no matter what you do, I need you to stay right here. Because the fat that is slowly destroying your organs has almost nothing to do with how much you eat or how often you exercise. This Japanese method will help you dissolve the most dangerous fat in your body, and honestly, it might just save your life. This is not a trend. This is published science. In the next 12 minutes, I am going to explain exactly why your midsection stays rigid even when the number on the scale drops. I am going to show you 3 specific biological signals that command your body to release the most dangerous fat you carry. And I am going to give you a clear, day 1 action plan so you can begin correcting those signals before your head hits the pillow tonight. I am Dr. Daniel Ashford. I have spent over 25 years in clinical practice working with adults over 60. And I can tell you, without exaggeration, that the single most misunderstood health threat I encounter in my patients is not high cholesterol, not blood sugar, and not even blood pressure. It is the invisible fat lodged between their organs that nobody measured and nobody explained. Before we go any further, do me a quick favor. Drop your age in the comments right now. I am going to reference some age-specific data later, and I want to know who is listening. You will see why that number matters in a few minutes. Let me paint a picture you might recognize. You are 68 years old. You have cut back on bread. You walk 3 or 4 mornings a week. Your doctor says your weight is acceptable. But every time you sit down, your belt digs in. Your midsection feels hard, almost swollen. You try on a shirt from 2 years ago and it will not button. You think, I must be doing something wrong. But you are not. The problem is not effort. The problem is that nobody taught you the difference between the fat you can grab and the fat that is quietly inflaming your insides. Here is what almost every diet commercial and fitness program gets backwards. They treat all body fat as one thing. Burn more calories than you consume, and it all disappears. That sounds logical. But it is dangerously incomplete, especially after 60. Your body carries 2 entirely separate categories of fat. The first kind sits just beneath your skin. You can pinch it on your arm, your thigh, your hip. That is subcutaneous fat. It is cosmetically annoying, but metabolically fairly quiet. The second kind is visceral fat. It forms deep inside your abdomen, packed tightly around your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys, and your intestines. You cannot pinch it. You cannot feel it directly, but it is the single most metabolically active and destructive tissue in the human body. Visceral fat does not just occupy space, it functions almost like a rogue organ. It secretes inflammatory molecules called cytokines around the clock. These cytokines interfere with how your cells respond to insulin, which is the hormone that controls blood sugar. Over time, this drives insulin resistance, which leads to elevated blood sugar, which feeds more visceral fat. It is a vicious loop. And the older you are, the faster that loop accelerates because your baseline levels of inflammation are already elevated through a process researchers now call inflammaging. There is one more thing visceral fat does that almost nobody talks about. It amplifies cortisol activity. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. In small doses, it is protective. But when visceral fat continuously stimulates cortisol production, it creates a state of chronic hormonal overload. And cortisol, in excess, tells your body to store more fat around the organs. So the fat literally produces the chemical signal that grows more of itself. That is not a willpower problem. That is a biochemical trap. So here is a quick check you can do at home right now. Stand up. Place your hand flat against your abdomen. If the tissue underneath your hand feels soft and pliable, that is mostly subcutaneous fat. Not ideal, but not the emergency. Now, if your midsection feels firm, distended, almost drum tight, that is visceral fat pressing outward from deep inside. That firmness is not muscle. It is internal pressure from fat deposits surrounding your organs. And if that is what you feel, everything I am about to share applies directly to you. Now, why have most approaches failed you? Because they target the wrong layer of fat with the wrong mechanism. Sit-ups and crunches strengthen abdominal muscles, but abdominal muscles sit on top of the fat. They do not reach the visceral layer at all. Severe calorie restriction does cause weight loss, but it tanks your resting metabolic rate, which means you burn fewer calories at rest every single day. Your body interprets starvation as a crisis and hoards visceral fat as an emergency fuel reserve. And prolonged steady-state cardio, the kind where you jog at the same pace for 45 minutes, raises cortisol significantly. You may shed water weight and some subcutaneous fat, but the visceral deposits often remain untouched or even grow. This is exactly why Japan looked at the problem from a fundamentally different angle more than 200 years ago. Japanese traditional medicine did not frame fat loss as a punishment or a deficit. It framed it as restoring metabolic balance. The question was never, how do we force the body to burn more? It was, what specific signals does the body need to voluntarily release stored organ fat? And out of that philosophy came 3 distinct metabolic signals that modern research has since validated with controlled trials. Let me walk you through each one. The first signal is dietary pigment activation. Inside your fat cells are genes that either promote fat storage or promote fat breakdown. These genes do not fire randomly. They respond to chemical signals from your diet. Carotenoids, the pigments responsible for the deep orange, red, and green colors in certain vegetables, function as direct genetic messengers. When carotenoid levels in your bloodstream rise, they suppress oxidative stress inside adipose tissue. Oxidative stress is basically cellular rust. It damages the structures inside your fat cells that would otherwise break down stored triglycerides and release them for energy. When that rust clears, the fat-burning machinery activates. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition followed over 3,000 adults and found that those with the highest plasma carotenoid concentrations had significantly lower visceral fat deposits compared to those with the lowest levels, independent of total caloric intake. That last part matters enormously. It was not about eating less. It was about what specific compounds were present in the food. Japanese cuisine has always been dense with these pigments. Kabocha squash, sweet potato, ninjin, which is their word for carrot, and leafy greens like komatsuna appear in nearly every traditional meal. These were never health trends in Japan. They were simply food. So here is your practical rule. Look at your plate. If everything on it is beige or white, that meal is doing nothing to signal visceral fat release. If at least one item has deep, vivid color, orange, red, dark green, you are delivering the right molecular message. Swap one pale item per meal for something deeply pigmented. Roasted red peppers instead of white rice, steamed broccoli instead of a dinner roll, sweet potato wedges instead of regular fries. This is not a calorie trade. It is a signal trade. The second signal is catechin-mediated fat oxidation. Catechins are a class of polyphenol compounds found at exceptionally high concentrations in green tea. The most potent of these is a molecule called EGCG, which stands for epigallocatechin gallate. EGCG does 2 things simultaneously in your body. First, it increases the rate at which your cells oxidize fatty acids. In plain language, it speeds up the process of converting stored fat into usable energy. Second, it partially blocks an enzyme called pancreatic lipase. Lipase is what your gut uses to break dietary fat into absorbable particles. When lipase activity drops, you absorb less fat from whatever you eat, so the effect is dual. You burn existing fat faster, and you store less new fat from each meal. In 2012, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial involving 118 adults with elevated visceral fat was published in the journal Obesity. After just 12 weeks, the group consuming a catechin-enriched green tea beverage showed a statistically significant reduction in visceral fat area compared to the control group. These were not athletes. These were regular adults making one dietary addition, but there is a critical distinction. Not every product labeled green tea delivers these results. Most bottled green teas in supermarkets contain trace amounts of actual catechins and enormous amounts of added sugar. The catechin content is effectively negligible. What you need is whole leaf matcha, or sencha grade green tea brewed fresh. Matcha in particular, because you consume the entire ground leaf, delivers roughly 3 times the catechin concentration of standard brewed green tea. 1 cup per day, unsweetened, ideally in the morning or early afternoon, is sufficient to activate this pathway. The natural caffeine present in the tea provides a secondary benefit. It mildly elevates your resting metabolic rate, which amplifies the fat oxidation effect of the catechins. Think of the caffeine as the engine and the catechins as the key that unlocks the fuel supply. The third signal is moderate intensity sustained movement. Visceral fat responds to exercise very differently than subcutaneous fat does. Subcutaneous fat will shrink with almost any consistent activity over time. Visceral fat is far more selective. It responds most aggressively to a narrow band of exercise intensity, roughly 70 to 75% of your maximum effort. Below that threshold, the metabolic stimulus is too weak to trigger significant visceral fat mobilization. Above it, cortisol production rises sharply and actually promotes visceral fat retention. Japanese public health guidelines have emphasized walking as the primary exercise modality for decades. Not running, not high-intensity interval training. Walking at a pace brisk enough to raise your breathing, but not so fast you cannot carry a conversation. Researchers at the University of Tsukuba in Japan conducted a meta-analysis of multiple controlled trials and concluded that moderate-intensity aerobic exercise produced the greatest reduction in visceral fat among adults over 55, even when total body weight remained nearly unchanged. Here is how you calibrate this at home. It is called the conversation test. While walking, try to speak a full sentence out loud. If you can sing without any effort, you are too slow. If you cannot get more than 3 or 4 words out before gasping, you are too fast. The ideal zone is where you can speak, but you notice your breathing is elevated. You hear the effort in your own voice. That is the 75% window. Stay there for 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, and you are sending the precise signal visceral fat responds to. There is one more piece of the movement equation that most people overlook. Walking after eating, specifically within 15 to 30 minutes of finishing a meal, dramatically blunts the postprandial glucose spike. A 2023 study in the journal Sports Medicine found that as little as 2 to 5 minutes of light walking after eating reduced blood sugar levels by up to 60% compared to sitting. Lower postprandial glucose means lower insulin demand. Lower insulin demand means less visceral fat accumulation. The Japanese have practiced this for generations. They call it shokugo no sanpo, which translates roughly to after-meal walk. It was never a formal exercise routine. It was simply a cultural habit baked into daily life. Now let me tell you about a woman I will call Margaret. She was 71. She came to me frustrated. She had been following a 1,200-calorie diet for almost a year. She walked her neighborhood every morning. She had lost 11 pounds on the scale, but her waist measurement had not budged. Her fasting glucose had actually risen from 92 to 108. Her doctor told her to keep doing what she was doing. When I looked at her food diary, her meals were almost entirely beige. Oatmeal, crackers, baked chicken, white rice, bananas, almost 0 deep pigmented vegetables. She drank 1 cup of black coffee in the morning and nothing else until lunch. Her walks were gentle strolls, pleasant but metabolically unstimulating. She was doing everything she had been told to do, and her visceral fat was likely growing the entire time. We made 3 changes. She added 1 deeply colored vegetable to every meal. She replaced her morning coffee with a cup of brewed matcha, and she increased her walking pace until she hit that conversation test threshold. Nothing else changed. She did not cut more calories. She did not join a gym. After 6 weeks, her waist measurement dropped by 2 inches. Her fasting glucose came back down to 94, and she told me something that I hear often. She said, "I finally feel like my body is cooperating with me instead of fighting me." Let me share one more case. A man I will call Gerald, 66 years old, former college athlete. His weight was technically within normal range. His BMI said he was fine, but his triglycerides were 212 and his fasting insulin was elevated. A DEXA scan revealed that nearly 30% of his abdominal fat was visceral. He was what researchers call metabolically obese, normal weight. Thin outside, inflamed inside. Gerald did not need to lose weight. He needed to change the composition of the fat he carried. We implemented the same 3-signal approach. Within 8 weeks, his triglycerides dropped to 151. His waist measurement dropped by 1.5 inches. His weight barely moved, 3 pounds total. But the internal shift was dramatic. Let me set your expectations clearly, because I do not want you to quit after 5 days. Week 1 will feel unremarkable. Your body is recalibrating. You may not see or feel anything different. That is normal. Week 2, you may notice slightly better energy in the late afternoon, and your digestion may feel smoother. By week 3, your clothes may start fitting differently around the midsection. Your belt might need to go 1 notch tighter. If you are checking fasting glucose, you may see it start to trend downward. By week 4 and beyond, the changes compound. If you get blood work done at the 6 or 8 week mark, you may see real movement in your triglycerides, your fasting glucose, and your inflammatory markers. Now I need to give you some important cautions. If you have kidney disease, talk to your doctor before making significant dietary changes, especially increasing certain vegetables that are high in potassium or oxalates. If you are on blood thinners like warfarin, large increases in green leafy vegetables can affect your INR levels, so coordinate with your prescribing physician. If you have heart failure or are on medications that restrict fluid intake, green tea counts toward your daily fluid volume, so factor that in. And if you have joint problems that make brisk walking painful, start slower and build up. 5 minutes at conversation pace is infinitely better than 0 minutes. This is general educational guidance. It is not a prescription tailored to your individual medical history. Always bring this information to your own doctor and make decisions together. Here is your action plan starting today. 1. Add 1 deeply pigmented vegetable to every meal, breakfast included. 2. Introduce 1 cup of unsweetened brewed matcha or sencha green tea daily, ideally before noon. 3. Walk at conversation test intensity for at least 20 minutes, 3 to 4 times per week, and when possible, take a short walk within 15 minutes of eating. 4. Maintain adequate protein intake, roughly 1 gram per pound of your target body weight each day. Protein preserves muscle mass, supports metabolic rate, and prevents the muscle loss that accelerates visceral fat storage in older adults. 5. Keep a simple log. Write down your waist measurement once a week and note how your energy and digestion feel. Bring that log to your next doctor visit. Let me bring this together for you. You were told that belly fat was a calories in, calories out problem. It is not. Visceral fat is a signaling problem. It responds to specific dietary pigments that switch on fat-burning genes. It responds to catechin compounds in real green tea that accelerate fat oxidation and block fat absorption. And it responds to moderate intensity movement at exactly the right effort level. Get those 3 signals right, and your body does not need punishment or deprivation to release that fat. It releases it because you finally gave it the correct instructions. You now understand something about visceral fat that most people, including many clinicians still operating on outdated guidelines, do not. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of knowledge that keeps you independent, keeps you out of the hospital, and keeps you strong enough to live your life on your own terms. If you made it this far, type the word signal in the comments so I know you stayed with me. If someone you care about has been struggling with stubborn belly fat, with a hard midsection that will not respond to dieting, send them this video. It might be the first time anyone explained this to them clearly. Hit subscribe if you want more of this kind of straight talk, because next week I am going to cover a compound found in ordinary white rice that, when prepared a specific way, cuts its glycemic impact nearly in half. You will not want to miss that one. I will see you then.